Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Cowboys Podcast. This is season 7, episode 3, and we continue on to chapter 3 of The Naked Corporation: How the Age of Transparency Will Revolutionize Business. The authors of this joint, Don Tapscott and David Ticoll. It was published in 2002 by Free Press. And me, your host, Alex, will continue with chapter 3, titled The Open Enterprise. A little subheading here says, "What is good?" Question mark. Let's get down to business. Just a quick disclaimer. Yes, I will be providing commentary intermittently, but I'll try to stay on pace so as to not break up the text too much. But if I hear something funny, I'll point it out. If I see some fuckery, I will also point that out. So, for smart firms, transparency is a corporate value, reflecting the corporate culture in general. Yet, transparency brings other corporate values, as market forces require firms to rethink what they stand for and how they behave toward their various stakeholders. Transparency and corporate values have a chicken and egg relationship. If words were drops of water, the literature on values and ethics would be an ocean. For millennia, philosophers and clerics have struggled with the question, what is, quote, good? This book is about how transparency changes corporate values and becomes a corporate value itself, an ethical compass for navigating the stormy seas of the future. But how do we define, quote, good behavior? No entrepreneur has made a bigger imprint on the U.S. retail landscape than Sam Walton, founder of the merchandising juggernaut Walmart Stores, Inc. What started in 1962 as a small store in the rural backwaters of Bentonville, Arkansas, has grown to be the world's largest retailer. With 2002 sales of $245 billion, Walmart's U.S. operation includes more than 2,870 discount stores, supercenters, and neighborhood markets, and more than 520 Sam's Clubs. Internationally, the company operates about 1,275 units. Walmart employs over 1.3 million associates worldwide. It makes a big economic contribution. But is Walmart a, quote, good company? The company has certainly delivered value to shareholders. It is one of the most valuable firms in the world. It has also brought low-cost consumer goods to communities across the United States. Many admire Walmart's success and good works. In 2001, its employees raised and contributed $196 million to support communities and local nonprofit organizations. In 2002, Walmart received the Ron Brown Award, the highest presidential award for employee relations and community initiatives. In 2003, the firm was number 1 on Fortune's, quote, most admired company in the United States list. Walmart's extraordinary success has been the subject of many studies, but an essay in the Journal of Retailing perhaps captures it best. There's a block quote. A block quote here says, Walmart has grown in the U.S. market because it connects itself symbolically to, I don't know why it's an English accent or some kind of shitty accent, but that's just me. That's me reading it. Because it connects itself symbolically to the dominant ideologies of American life. Through imagery of frugality, family, religion, neighborhood, community, and patriotism, Walmart locates itself centrally on Main Street of a nostalgic hometown. These symbolic connections not only positively dispose shoppers to Walmart, but also, quote, decouple Walmart from unfavorable outcomes of its success. These consequences include retailers being forced out of business, small town stop Walmart campaign. These are, quote, Stop Walmart's campaigns, accusations of predatory pricing, and allegations about products being sourced from overseas sweatshop suppliers. And that's the end of the block quote right there. As one newspaper noted, Sam Walton was, quote, the folksy tycoon with a killer instinct. Damn, that sounds pretty bold, pretty brash. The folksy tycoon, folksy tycoon. That means he's a people person, I guess. Down to earth, I guess, but with a killer instinct, meaning a snake? I don't know. We'll find out. The company has assiduously promoted a small town aw shucks veneer, despite steamroller merchandising tactics that crush one competitor after another. Rather than sprinkle stores across the country more or less at random, the company methodically saturates each region with stores before moving on to the next, much like an army on the move. This is this is corporate war. This is the basis of what the entire podcast is. This is the theme. The overarching theme of business is that business is always personal, and that business is war. You're born into it. Whether or not you yourself are incorporated, if you can hear this podcast, you are at war. It's a corporate war. It can be quiet, it can be cold, or it can be loud, it can be hot, right? But the sooner you come to terms with the fact that every day is a struggle, every day is a hustle, and that you are entry level forever, regardless of the social strata you were born into, regardless of the social strata you managed to climb up to, you are entry level and just as easily could be demoted. Funny enough, by someone who's not even your supervisor. Like Corporate Cowboys, right? It says here, oh, it's a quote. It's a quote. We would go as far as we could from a warehouse and put in a store. Then we would fill in the map of that territory, state by state, county seat by county seat, until we had saturated the market according to area, explained Sam Walton. Then on to the next. What a savage. He's like a general. He's methodical, man. Moves his troops in a methodical manner, and nobody's really shooting him down. It's not really a hot war for people, right? I mean, he might employ some unsavory characters and use some unsavory tactics and strategies, right? As far as with his own employees and competitors. But it doesn't really look like anybody's standing up to him. Doesn't really look like anybody's putting a dent in his wallet or his operation, if you will. Rural poverty was caused, at least in part, by the fact that consumer goods were dramatically more expensive in rural America than in urban America. Sam Walton recognized this as a business opportunity. Says Red Hat co-founder Bob Young, quote, arguably the most successful program to alleviate rural poverty since the Second World War has not been some government welfare program or a government agricultural subsidy program. The most successful program has been the free market at work in the form of Walmart's rapid expansion, serving the rural customers' demand for better service and lower prices. Walmart believed so strongly in this opportunity that for the first 40 years of its rapid expansion, Walmart served small and mid-sized rural markets exclusively. Depending on your perspective and self-interest, the arrival of Walmart in your community can be invigorating or devastating. Walmart creates lots of jobs in its stores. It has close to 1 million employees in the United States alone. Critics insist, however, that any community Walmart moves into suffers a net loss of jobs because of the bankruptcies that ensue among local shopkeepers. They say Walmart has gutted the main streets of towns across the United States. As for those who end up working for the company, it strives to keep as many as possible on a part-time basis to avoid paying benefits. The company is stridently anti-union and has crushed organizing campaigns wherever they've occurred. Yet, for consumers, the retail giant provides rock-bottom prices. Often, Walmart's retail price is lower than what small merchants pay wholesale. And if you're a supplier, a Walmart deal can potentially guarantee a market for life, assuming you can survive the grueling price reductions and operational integration the company demands. That's like ruling with an iron fist inside of a velvet glove, man. These motherfuckers know how to put in work. Walmart illustrates the challenge of defining what is, quote, good or ethical in business today. How should we evaluate the company's behavior and the values that underlie this business? Laws and jurisprudence don't help us much. Walmart claims to be a law-abiding corporate citizen. And then in parentheses it says, though some accuse it of forcing employees to work overtime without pay. Assuming Walmart's claim is true, abiding by the letter of the law is a necessary but insufficient condition for a company to be, quote, good. Yeah, just because you follow the law doesn't mean you are a good person. You can follow mandates, guidelines, recommendations, requirements. Following all of that bullshit, like as we've seen in the past couple of years here in the early 2020s, following that bullshit does not qualify you to be good, right? It doesn't unqualifiedly make you a good person. You're just following the lead, coloring within the lines. Now, as far as the accusations that Walmart forces its employees to work overtime without pay, Sam Walton really isn't dictating that, though Sam Walton knows what its policies and procedures are. And if Sam Walton attends meetings, right, that touch on the productivity, that touch on the metrics of the company overall, then Sam Walton knows. Sam Walton knows that he's got motherfuckers working for them under duress. Under duress. And that is a legal term. Whether or not they want to admit it, they don't fucking have to. They know. That's the point. And the longer folks at the bottom put up with it, the longer the shit will continue. So what do? What can you do? Other than take the reins in your hand and become a corporate cowboy. You need to arm yourself with knowledge, right? Or, something similar, something physical. Religions have long established concepts of good and evil. Continuing, some thinkers propose religious morality as a basis for business morality. John Dalla Costa explains how a cross-cultural comparison of the world's religions yield a surprisingly common set of moral standards suitable for governing commerce, law, and society. Religious norms, he says, enable societies to function and develop. The Ten Commandments, for example, set a number of basic rules for human interaction. In addition to such commandments as thou shalt not lie or kill, common religious norms include the golden rule, in parentheses, treat thy neighbor as thyself. That's funny. I thought it was going to go with the business golden rule. The one with the gold makes the rules, motherfucker. All right, continuing. However, even though Sam Walton was a religious man, it's impossible to evaluate the company according to such lofty principles. Walmart must behave in a way consistent with the values of the communities within which it operates, as a community boycott could be devastating. If its relationships with business partners become predatory, Walmart will have greater difficulty building networked businesses. If the company treads in the gray areas of the law, it will attract the attention of governments, maybe causing new legislation to control unacceptable behavior. If working and environmental conditions in its suppliers' manufacturing facilities in the developing world do not meet the rising international civil foundation, it could face a Nike-style trust crisis. Yeah, for more information on this Nike-style trust crisis and what is a civil foundation, go listen to Chapter 2. That's Season 7, Episode 2. Go listen to that, get a little bit of context, some background on what makes up the civil foundation, especially the International Civil Foundation, and what happened to Nike, right? What happened to Nike? Continuing, if Walmart terminates its philanthropic initiatives, it may lose media and public support, in turn causing its grief with other stakeholders. Walmart's behavior increasingly needs to correspond to the value systems of stakeholders if it is to have continued success. Collectively, these value systems constitute the ethical foundation of society. Variation, nope, I fucked that one up. Various stakeholder markets define what is good, and markets are becoming more demanding, holding companies to higher standards. Consider how corporate values and the definition of acceptable behavior have evolved. A decade or two ago, executives routinely took their families out for dinner and submitted the bill as a business expense. They would accept courtside tickets from suppliers to take their family to a basketball game. Quote, if I did that today, I'd be shot, says Ron Ricci, Vice President of Positioning for Cisco Systems. Quote, and if I did it and kept it a secret, I'd be found out too. There are systems in place here to ensure transparency and honesty. People assume you need to be open and truthful. Next subtitle says, Rethinking Corporate Responsibility. Because of the crisis of trust, the 100-year-old debate on corporate responsibility has never been more intense. More than ever, the debate is characterized by emotion, vagueness, and confusion. There are three dominant perspectives regarding the firm's relationship to society: the debt to society view, the shareholder value view, and the do well by doing good view. We believe a new perspective is needed. The debt to society view we believe a new perspective is needed. Where did I fuck that up? We believe a new perspective is needed. The debt to society view, oh, they haven't introduced it. I thought they were going to list it next. The debt to society view holds that firms should be good because they owe it to society. Corporations receive charters and special protections, in particular the benefits of limited liability from society. In exchange, they have responsibilities to make contributions beyond the letter of the law. I'm in this boat. Motherfuckers got a debt to society, especially when you incorporate for the sake of business. If you're out to turn a profit, you ought to turn back around and reinvest that profit into the community from which you extracted it from. Why? Because it creates more profit. I mean, how do you expect to extract all of the value and give none of it back? You're going to be left with a dead community. And sure, you can move on to the next one, but you move on to the next one and continue this pattern, this process. You gain a reputation, and then you bump into motherfuckers who are immovable objects, right? You think you become prideful, you become arrogant, you become braggadocious, right? You are emboldened by the fact that you haven't been stopped, and you think you are this unstoppable force. And then you hire a corporate cowboy that you didn't know was one at the very bottom of your fucking ranks at entry level, and they tear your whole shit up. All right. Some who hold this perspective regard corporate initiatives in the area of social responsibility as motivated by self-interest, tainted at best and sinister at worst. They decry, quote, the strategic thrust of corporate philanthropy and the, quote, hidden motives behind corporate citizenship initiatives. If you want to be a corporate citizen, if you are a citizen, then you have civic duties, dog. And if you can't vote, then those duties appear in other ways, such as minding the fact, paying attention to the fact, taking care of the fact that you received this charter. Back in the day when the government chartered, when the government of the people, by the people, for the people, when they chartered a corporation, it's because this corporation was going to produce a good, some kind of product, some kind of service that the government itself could not. So that's necessarily the government using its power, using its will to create service and goods for the people, right? So how is the government, how are we the people, the royal we, going to allow corporations to just fuck us blind and, and not get their comeuppance? You feel me? All right. This view, hold on. Extreme activists in this camp view business ethics as an oxymoron. I don't view it as an oxymoron. It's a fucking duty. It's an obligation. Right up there, it says, right up there with scented deodorant, jumbo shrimp, and a new one, accounting principles. This view holds that corporations driven by the profit motive are pretty much incapable of self-initiated ethical behavior. Capitalism is greed. Capitalists cannot be counted on to behave well. They need to be regulated, protested against, and forced to act in the interest of society. I think it comes back to education. You can't force anybody to do anything, because the moment you think you are regulating a behavior, you're gonna catch externalities somewhere else. Those symptoms will pop up somewhere else. Why else is Walmart still facing accusations in 2023? We're in the year 2023 now. This book was written in 2002, and those accusations and allegations go back, it says something like 40 fucking years. Go back 40 years. And it's been 20 years since this book has been written. Dog, you mean to tell me that the entire time Walmart has existed, they've been doing dirt? It's not impossible. It's not unimaginable. And it's not I wouldn't put it past them. When you think you can hold somebody back, they come up with a new scheme. It's like cops and robbers all over again. You have to develop a mutual understanding, some type of understanding, and that starts through education. If not by educating the quote owners and the quote capitalists, then educating the workers, educating the labor force. Education. I'm low-key anti-union myself. Why? Because it's just another form of corporate. That's all. It's just another hierarchy where the shit continues to roll downhill and not a lot of movement happens. Not a lot of, progress manifests. There's not a lot of good deeds. There's not enough good deeds that come out of unions. Let's put it that way. You pay all the union dues that you want. It doesn't mean that you're going to get what you need. You have to go out and get that shit yourself as a corporate cowboy. Continuing, one leading exponent of this point of view is the International Forum on Globalization. Fuck globalization. Sorry, I'll stop. In what it claims to be the, quote, definitive documents for the anti-corporate globalization movement, the forum suggests that the concept of voluntary, quote, corporate responsibility, says here, which we essentially defend in this book, is naive at best. In quotes, institutions that habitually lie to their shareholders and treat obeying the law as a cost-benefit calculation may also lie about their compliance to voluntary corporate codes with the complicity of their auditors. Yeah, you've never heard of paying off auditors? You've never heard of doctoring reports? You've never heard of cooking books? The forum is skeptical of government-enforced standards of corporate conduct because they do not change the nature of the corporation itself, and they leave governments saddled with the burden of attempting to enforce the law on institutions that are able to spend millions of dollars on lawyers, lobbyists, and politicians to weaken the rules and thwart enforcement action. The forum, yeah, I mean, let's just put it this way. I think I've mentioned this before in past episodes. Go back and listen if you would like. But I worked in an industry, in a service industry that produced food, right? It was a quick service food industry. And this was on the West Coast, California. And given the demographic, the type of food, right? Given the type of food, the style of food, and the demographic of the population, a large number, a significant percentage of our workforce was undocumented. Now, I'm not making any claims, but let's just say that regulators, those folks who would conduct raids, I don't know if you know those folks that conduct raids and deport people, those folks got paid off. All right. The forum supports I'm just continuing here. The forum supports various restrictions on big companies, like revoking corporate charters and criminalizing all political contributions, but it wants more, a fundamental restructuring away from the domination of global corporations and toward more democratic and socially and ecologically sustainable enterprises. This entails reversing the trend of globe-spanning corporate concentration toward, and block quote here, towards smaller businesses capable of functioning as human scale commodities of interest in which people know each other, are dedicated to a common purpose, and share rewards more equitably. They must be owned by people who have a direct involvement in the operation, workers, community representatives, suppliers, rather than by distant investors who buy and sell without personal engagement other than profits, growth, and balance figure sheets. All businesses must be transparent and accountable to all stakeholders in the community. Now, as much as I like that block quote, this is a side comment, as much as I like that block quote, it sounds too idealistic. I'm not saying it's impossible, right? It sounds too idealistic because it sounds too rosy, if that makes any sense. Too rosy, too motherfucking rosy, and too Marxist. All right, it was too veiled. I don't know if too many people would get it, but yeah, it sounds too fucking Marxist in the sense that a shit can't happen. A shit can't happen without education first. Why? Because if you just try to flip the script on corporations in today's day and age to move from capitalism to something social in that sense, right? To something more Marxist, this shit goes haywire. Socialism almost always, actually always, now that I think about it, has led to severe forms of starvation and death. Go look it up. Notwithstanding the self-admitted giant issues of this prescription for a return to almost pre-industrial age local economics, there's quotes here, who would provide the food? Who would finance research into new medicines? Who would finance retirements? The debt to society view, it says, the debt to society view has some merit. It is true that corporations are creatures of the state, presumed to be incorporated for the benefit of the public. See, I wasn't lying, right? I wasn't lying. They are creatures of the state. The fact that it says here that they're presumed means that they're not today. But even today, motherfuckers just like to play dumb. Motherfuckers like to act blind. Motherfuckers like, because you're born into a system, you ought to believe that this is the way it always has been and always shall be. Fuck all of that. You have to re-understand, re-educate, relearn what it is you think you know about corporate and the corporate world order into which you've been born into. As a corporate cowboy, as a motherfucking corporate cowboy. Some of you motherfuckers are just sleeping, or just, you got caught lacking. You got caught sleeping. Now you're in some student debt. Now you've got a mortgage. You failed to negotiate your salary. You're bitching and crying every day how you got mouths to feed, and you're living check to check, hand to mouth, or some shit, right? I'm not outright shitting on everybody. I empathize. I sympathize, but only to a degree. Only to a degree. It is true that corporations are creatures of the state, presumed to be incorporated for the benefit of the public. Society provides them benefits like limited liability and the right to make a profit. Many people legitimately question what firms give back relative to what they receive and demand of society. Former U.S. Secretary of Labor Robert Reich asks why corporations should have been allowed to spend $100 million on lobbying, give 350 free trips to members of Congress, and spend $50 million on advertising, all to defeat President Bill Clinton's 1993-94 efforts to provide health insurance to the 40 million Americans who lack it. Where's the public benefit there? Just what does the corporation owe society anyway? Whether or not one agrees with any particular complaint against corporations, the core insight to the debt society view is that, at the end of the day, society retains the rights to regulate the firm, and this is how it should be. The firm, like any citizen or other entity, is subject to society's laws. Yet laws cannot make men or firms good. Laws cannot make men or firms good. Get that through your fucking skull. Laws cannot make men or women, right? Cannot make motherfuckers or firms good. They can only define a low common denominator of acceptable behavior. And it's only defined. They can't even enforce. That's what you have law enforcement for, right? They can't even fucking enforce it. They just like point it out like, hey, that would probably work, or hey, that would probably be good. And even then, it's just probably, because there's a lot of laws and mandates today. There's a lot of guidances today about, I don't know, some shit you got to get in your arm that they claim to be, or that it might be good and effective, safe and effective, and it might not, right? The shareholder value view, the next one. The shareholder value view holds that since the job of the enterprise is to create value for shareholders, it's inappropriate for companies to take on the presumed costs associated with being good. Firms, according to this view, contribute to society by creating useful products and services, creating jobs, paying taxes, and generating wealth for shareholders. This obviates the need for ethical considerations outside the requirements of the law. Essentially, this is saying that so long as they turn over a profit for the shareholders probably don't give a fuck what the corporation does outside of the bounds of the law. Which, if we're talking about outside of the bounds of the law, this could just be outside of the bounds of U.S. law. So they could be overseas gunning down villages to go work on banana plantations. Get it? They could be outside hiring hitmen to gun down entire villages who don't want to become slaves and work on banana plantations. Get it? Like Chiquita Banana? And yet, if the U.S. doesn't see it, if the U.S. doesn't catch wind of it, or if it isn't against U.S. law, nobody gives a fuck, right? Firms, it says, according to this view, contribute to society. Continuing, the purpose of the corporation, according to this view, is to make money, not give it away. As Railroad King William Vanderbilt said in 1882, the public be damned. This motherfucker said, I'm working for my stockholders. Sounds like a bitch. He said, I don't take any stock in this working for anybody's good but our own. Railroads are not run on sentiment, but on business principles and to pay. Or as Robert C. Goizueta, Robert C. Goizueta, former CEO of Coca-Cola, stated, businesses are created to meet economic needs. When they try to become all things to all people, they fail. They have one job: to generate a fair return for our owners. It says here in quotes, for our owners. and we must remain focused on our core duty, creating value over time. Economist, well, hold on, just a quick comment. I got a comment, man. Quick comment. Go look at IBM, go look at fucking 3M, go look at a lot of like older corps, a lot of older blue chip corps. I mean, Vanderbilt is an exception, right? Because again, if you read this, he sounds like a bitch. He sounds like he's tied. He sounds like he's got a fucking collar. Like they got this motherfucker on a collar and leash, and they only got him working, and he can't think for him. He cannot think for himself because he has majority shareholders. It sounds like the motherfucker lost his own majority holding, his own majority interest in his company, and he's just fucking controlled. Now he has to turn a profit. Otherwise, what? They're gonna dangle his kids out of a fucking building or something. It happens. It happens, you know. But go look at IBM. Go look at some of these other companies that actually create communities that will build and develop whole ass subdivisions for their workforce. Now, I'm not saying that that's family, but that's fucking borderline family, right? And I know a lot of family who, when they grow up, they want to like buy houses down the street from each other, live close and next to each other. When a company does this, I'm telling you, it looks like you're preparing for war. You've got your troops all in one place. You've got them all prepared. You can have them well fed, well supplied, well kept, well hydrated, right? All of that for the next day, for the next work day, for the next mission, for the next objective, the next milestone. That's war. That's war. Economist Milton Friedman, the clearest and most widely quoted proponent of this view is a lightning rod for vitriol from the debt to society camp. There's a block quote here that says, "What does it mean to say that the corporate executive has a social responsibility in his capacity as a businessman? If this statement is not pure rhetoric, it must mean that he is to act in some way that is not in the best interest of his shareholders. For example, that he is to refrain from increasing the price of a product in order to contribute to the social objective of preventing inflation." Hold on. I gotta cut this motherfucker short real quick. You mean to tell me that corporations creating inflation? No way. It's almost as if government creates inflation, right? And corporate creates inflation. Continuing. Even though the price increase will be in the best interests of the corporation, or that he is to make expenditures on reducing pollution beyond the amount that it is in the best interest of the corporation, or that it is required by law in order to contribute to the social objective of improving the environment. In each of these cases, the corporate executive would be spending someone else's money for the general social interest. Dog, you spend somebody else's money to market all your bullshit to the public. You spend somebody else's money to make money, right? So why wouldn't you spend somebody else's money to garner the type of reputation that creates you more money? I don't know. It's like they don't believe in investment. They only believe in sacrifice. And then at the very end, they believe in panic. At the very, very end, these motherfuckers start believing in God. That's funny. That's always cracked me up. The logical conclusion, when they're at the end of a gun, right? The logical conclusion, it says, of the shareholder value view is that if it's legal to dump pollutants and carcinogens into a river and it will improve the bottom line, then it's the right thing to do. If child slavery is legal in the Ivory Coast, then it is fine for a chocolate manufacturer to buy cocoa beans picked by child slaves, even if it is a global firm with headquarters in a country that outlaws child labor and slavery. That's the US, if you didn't know. If it's legal to advertise smoking in China, then do it. Where it's legal to cause harm, then, as the International Forum on Globalization says, all such decisions are cost-benefit calculations. Now you see why corporations spend the kind of money overseas that they do. Now you know why hit squads exist. Now you know why any organization is backed by violence. Now you know why the government has a perceived monopoly on the shit. They like to believe they have a monopoly on violence, but I mean, it's only because they have backers. It's only because they have sponsors. It's only because they have motherfuckers who are throwing down dollars and rolling the dice on government. Now, for the time being, the dice is loaded, but loaded dice don't always mean you win. The do well by doing good perspective, the third perspective. The doing well by doing good perspective seeks to sidestep the moral debate and argue the business case for corporate citizenship. Good, in quotes here, good behavior is good for the bottom line. I mean, shit, I believe that. This is often and increasingly true, but not always. The body shop. I mean, I think when it says not always, it's because, to me, it's because your business plan was not feasible, right? If your business plan includes carcinogens and then you have to expend money cleaning up carcinogens and all of a sudden you're like taking a fucking loss, you're like, this business isn't becoming profitable, and you start bitching and crying, it's because you were dealing with carcinogens to begin with. And then, I don't get how this isn't logical to some motherfuckers, but apparently, it's not common sense. It's not always common sense. It's not always logic and tact. It's not always logic and tact with corporate. Sometimes motherfuckers move on reaction, move on emotion. They get blinded by desire. They get blinded by the money, and the shit just goes to their head. They get lost in the sauce. It happens. Good behavior is good for the bottom line, it says. This is often and increasingly true, but not always. The body shop evidenced strong values and socially responsible behavior, but for other reasons faced problems in the marketplace. Companies must address all the basics and align their values-based strategies with their overall business strategies. The idea that where the fuck it just introduces here the body shop. It introduces us to the body shop and doesn't give us any fucking context. That's some bullshit. It says here, but for other reasons, face problems in the marketplace. Okay, cool, but don't give us the reasons then. Fucking A. The idea that companies do well by doing good is receiving a lot of attention these days, but the past also provides evidence for the opposite view, that what some describe as irresponsible behavior produces a healthy return. Many companies have done well, sometimes for a long time, by being bad. Having brutal labor practices, there's Sunbeam under Al Dunlop. Engaging in monopolistic practices, there's IBM, there's AT&T and Microsoft. Neglecting environmental concerns, there's Exxon. Exploiting developing countries, there's Nestle. Overpaying executives, and this person says, you name it, they're all overpaying executives, and to some extent that's true. Or selling products that routinely and predictably kill their own customers. That's the tobacco industry. These are also examples of how inappropriate behavior can get companies into trouble. But what of the practices that haven't been banned or shamed out of existence? Consider the many activities that arguably are harmful, but for which there are few sanctions. Auto companies selling gas-guzzling SUVs, corporate tax planning that shifts head offices offshore, food companies that fail to divulge information such as the presence of genetically modified products, oil companies that pay politicians to fight environmental accords, and pharmaceutical companies that bribe doctors with free samples and vacations. No way, pharmaceutical companies bribe doctors? These activities are all legal. While many abhor such practices, the stakeholder consensus that such behaviors must be stopped has not reached the tipping point. Customers still buy SUVs. Offshore tax havens have just recently become an issue. Corporate political contributions remain part of the American way, and drug companies continue to enjoy their commercial freedom. And a side note here, and limited liability, as evidenced through the most recent schedule of immunizations, or I guess gene therapy now it's called, right? Whatever the fuck. Conversely, good citizenship can harm a firm. Consider a power company that burns coal to generate electricity. Pollutants from the process create what economists call a negative externality, a cost, in this case, to society, that may not be borne by the company and therefore not reflected in its prices. A company that chooses to voluntarily absorb the costs of such negative externalities can place itself at a competitive disadvantage. Funny, huh? But that's only competitive disadvantage. Funny, huh? How we're taught as youngsters, as young people, as young drones in institutional education, in the industrial education complex. We're trained like drones to work from bell to bell, right? To clean up after ourselves. And yet, these motherfuckers, yet corporate, wants to not clean up after itself because what? It takes too much time, takes too much energy, takes too much effort, takes too much money. Give me a fucking break. I was born into a fucking shithole. I was born into a war. I'm cleaning up after every motherfucking body. And it's fun. Continuing. Conversely, good citizenship can harm a firm. Then why the fuck have them as citizens, right? I mean, we kick out and deport and keep motherfuckers from coming in if we don't think they'll be good citizens, and yet corporations can just run amok, right? Consider a power company that burns coal to generate electricity. I already read that. I already read this paragraph. I'm just reading it again, I guess, for the fucking catharsis. Another obstacle, continuing, another obstacle. Different stakeholders have competing interests. Shareholders, customers, and employees could all be harmed if a power company were the only one in this industry to raise its prices to pay the incremental costs of global warming that results from its coal-burning hydro plants. Yet, wearing their hats as citizens, these same people face the costs of environmental degradation, such as increased health problems. Various stakeholder groups may have different perspectives on what is, quote, good. Because win-win outcomes are not always possible, firms need to sort out the trade-offs. In such situations, governments may choose to step in to impose rules and a level playing field. If all power companies must raise rates to convert away from coal or to pay for reforestation, then it simply becomes part of doing business. Taxes on automobile air conditioners and gas guzzlers are weak examples of such actions. But government action doesn't always level the playing field. It may also create winners and losers. Consider the debate over the Kyoto Accord. Pollution from factories and cars creates a negative externality. That's global warming, supposedly. Government agreements like the Kyoto Accord require companies to internalize some of these costs by investing in emission reduction. Oil companies may suffer because of reduced use of carbon fuels. The rationale is that the burden of such costs should be placed at the point of origin in order to protect the welfare of society. It costs society less to reduce the use of carbon fuels than to deal with the consequences of global warming. Cleaning up after the fact is difficult, maybe impossible, so the burden is placed on corporations. The world will benefit in the long term from Kyoto, but some companies, including their employees and shareholders, will lose. While a cash-rich company like Shell may be able to afford a 20-year transition plan to sustainable fuels, some small oil companies will go out of business. There are many such companies across the oil industry. For them, survival takes precedence over good behavior. I think for Shell too. Shell just got more money, so they might last longer, but it doesn't mean that they're on their good behavior. It doesn't mean that they're on good behavior. I mean, but who the fuck? I mean, okay. Maybe this book is trying to give an objective view of things, and I'm just shitting on both sides. So that's me operating as a corporate cowboy, being a realist, being a cynic, optimistic at times also, because I know this shit is always on the way up. Every day above ground is a good day, right? So this shit is always on the way up. In fact, not many business leaders think of good behavior as a strategic imperative. It means it's not a priority. It says here, when 700 US executives were asked what drives their social involvement or citizenship initiatives, few mentioned business strategy, 12%, customer attraction and retention, 3%, or meeting public expectations, 1%. The vast majority said they are driven by non competitive and therefore optional factors like improving society, company traditions, or their personal values. Employees, customers, shareholders, and others see you when you're sleeping, and they know when you're awake. They know if you've been bad or good, so you better be good. And it doesn't finish here for goodness sake, or corporate cowboys will come visit your bitch ass and kneecap you. Of course, firms can be harmed by engaging in activities or practices that are inconsistent with the values of relevant stakeholders, as the cases of Nestle, Ticoll, and WorldCom show. But in the past, punishment, rather than being swift, was often glacial. You know why? This is a side note. You know why? Punishment has been glacial because the government moves fucking slow. That's who's regulating. That's who's enforcing. You want punishment to be fast? You need to grow and learn to become a corporate cowboy with the motherfucking quickness and get to work. Today, a competitor or protagonist can seize on every action a firm makes. Is that not us? Are we not protagonists? Warts are tough to hide, says George Carpenter, Procter and Gamble's director of sustainable development. The hard data on doing well by doing good may not be there yet, but it is clear that companies can do very badly by being bad. Avoid doing bad is increasingly not good enough. Evidence is mounting that a company can distinguish itself in the marketplace through ethical values and behavior, building trust with all stakeholders, and achieving competitive advantage as a result. The next little subheading here, toward a new perspective. Extreme holders of the first two views, the debt to society and the shareholder value, may seem diametrically opposed, but they actually defend the same logic. If a corporation behaves ethically, it can only be for altruistic or ethical reasons. Such choices invariably entail costs. So, when companies invest in responsible behavior, there is always a net loss for shareholders. It's not net loss, but economists will spin facts differently for different audiences, whatever. Both views have the same conception of the impact of corporate social responsibility on the bottom line. It's a sacrifice. The only difference is in their conclusions. The debt to society folks say it should be forced on corporations by the state. The shareholder value camp say it is intolerable. Both fail to understand that in a transparent world, firms must increasingly address trade-offs among the interests of many different stakeholders. Stakeholders other than shareholders are gaining power, and that means that firms must take them into account if they are to do well. Market forces are requiring companies to change their values and their behavior toward all stakeholders. Evidence is mounting that there is a relationship between corporate values and profits, a positive one. As for doing well by doing good, often this perspective, while a step forward, tends to trivialize the emergent relationship between corporate values and corporate success. It implies that if companies invest in philanthropy, corporate citizenship, or corporate social initiatives, that there will be payoffs. For example, Philanthropy is viewed as a marketing investment or a way to create meaning for employees. While these points may be true and philanthropy is certainly a good thing, something more important is happening. Being a good company doesn't just deliver benefits. Increasingly, it is a requirement for success. A new architecture for the firm is emerging, which requires a rock solid foundation of ethical corporate values. Values not in the old motherhood sense of the term, as inscribed in the dusty corporate values statement, rather, values embedded in the corporate DNA. Get the fuck, yo! They trying to humanize corporations so bad out here, made them legal persons and all that with Citizens United, and now they want to have corporate DNA. Corporations are made by groups of individuals, groups of people. It's just a group of individuals who've selected to have a hierarchy and they work towards a common purpose. Sometimes it's fucking each other over. They must be values that are deeply held within corporate culture that shape products, services, core business operations, brand image, reputation, relationships, and everyday personal interactions, and that drive everything a firm does and how it operates. Why? When the corporation is naked, shared values are the precondition for establishing trust and sustainable business performance. A force, as we shall see, that is the sine qua non of the new business environment and the networked corporation. This is not to say that markets are sufficient to achieve social justice in society, a view held by so-called market fundamentalists. The private sector is not competent to address social goals such as the redistribution of wealth. The private sector is not competent to address social goals such as the redistribution of wealth. I do want to comment on that because the government sector is definitely not competent to address the redistribution of wealth, nor does it have the right to do so. Companies may engage in philanthropy, but society has not given them the right to collectively address broader issues of social justice. They may behave well toward various stakeholders as a matter of economic necessity, but clearly markets are insufficient. Capitalist societies use the power of the state for setting and achieving social goals. Firms are not agents of democracy, and therefore they lack the representative governance and accountability mechanisms that governments have to set social priorities. Citizens may elect governments to enact their preferred social priorities, but they don't elect boards of directors. The next subheading here, the open enterprise. A new perspective is needed that goes beyond the three discussed so far. Firms need to build trusting relationships to thrive, and transparency is changing trust. A new model of the firm is emerging, the open enterprise. That must be that last perspective, the open enterprise perspective. Open enterprises are actively transparent while carefully managing their critical competitive information and security. They understand that transparency is a corporate value that must be connected to principles of honesty, accountability, and consideration to sustain trust. They embrace networked business models and understand that relationships, reciprocal engagements with customers, employees, partners, shareholders, and the public are critical to success. Their goal is to create value for all stakeholders, applying collaborative processes to resolve the trade-offs among competing interests of stakeholders. As we shall explain, open enterprises will enjoy better financial performance than traditional firms, which, lacking trust and sustainable business strategies, fall by the wayside. Capital market transparency and accountability will give them better share performance. They will tend to create better value for customers, critical in a transparent world where the best, rather than incumbents, are more likely to prevail. Open enterprises engage partners in high transparency business webs to create products and services with lower costs and market differentiation. They treat knowledge workers as investors of intellectual capital and build loyalty through openness. They understand the liabilities of increased public scrutiny and the importance of societal trust, absorbing the cost of externalities within the framework of a sound business strategy. Regardless of where on earth they do business, they operate with the highest standard of integrity and transparency, building trust, global stability, and social justice. Our research indicates these are the new instruments of wealth creation for a transparent, networked world.
The open enterprise is illustrated in Figure 3.1. In a transparent world, values enable the creation of trust. Trust strengthens relationships with all stakeholders, in turn, enabling networked business models and the creation of value. Competitive products and services for customers, motivated and effective employees, stable and supportive societies, and good returns for shareholders. We call this relationship between corporate values and stakeholder value the values value ladder. That's a good name. Each step is a requirement for the next. Failure to execute at each level in a transparent world can be fatal. We step up the ladder in the balance of this chapter. And yeah, next is Figure 3.1, the values value ladder, and I'll describe it for you briefly. Essentially, at the very bottom, So on the left-hand side, on the left-hand column, there is transparency. On the right, there's like the outcomes of what transparency transforms, right? So on the right side, there are shareholders, there's customers, employees, partners, communities, and other shareholders. So at the very bottom of the ladder, there is transparency, which changes business integrity. And when business integrity includes transparency, there's an arrow driving to business integrity. So transparency flows to business integrity, and business integrity is consistent with those of its shareholders. So there's another arrow that flows to the right over to the shareholders. So transparency changes business integrity. Business integrity is consistent with those of its shareholders. And then that creates one rung of the ladder, right? Now there's an arrow flowing up, and that arrow is labeled enable. So one could venture to guess that business integrity enables trust, right? Now, transparency also works on trust. On the left-hand side, transparency with an arrow flowing to trust. This arrow is labeled validates. So transparency validates trust. And there's an arrow leading from trust to the right-hand side, trust of the shareholders, right? So transparency validates the trust of shareholders. Now, this trust rung has an arrow leading up also, and it says strengthen. That next piece is relationships. Trust strengthens relationships, and transparency works on it too, right? So transparency flowing to the right, flowing into relationships. Transparency informs relationships with shareholders. The arrow leading out is with. Transparency informs relationships with shareholders. Now that's rung 3. There's an arrow leading up to rung 4, and that's produce. It's labeled produce. So relationships produce value is the last rung. Value. And transparency on the left-hand side, transparency on the left-hand side flows into value. It says it evidences. Transparency evidences value for shareholders. Transparency evidences value for shareholders. Essentially, it validates. It validates that value. It proves itself valuable for its shareholders. Little subheading says, Step 1, corporate values. We focus on four values that form the basis of trust: honesty, accountability, consideration, and transparency. Together constitute what we call the new business integrity and the foundation of the open enterprise. Let's examine each of these. Honesty is not just an ethical issue, it has become an economic one. To establish trusting relationships with employees, partners, customers, shareholders, and the public, firms need to be open, fairly disclosing information. They must be truthful, accurate, and complete in communications. They must not mislead or be perceived to mislead. In everything from motivating employees, negotiating with partners, publishing product information, disclosing financial information, or explaining the environmental impacts of a new factory, companies are expected to tell the truth. As we described in chapter 1, go listen to part one of the Naked Corporation. That's season 7, episode 1. As we described in chapter 1, in the networked world, people and organizations have unprecedented access to information and the ability to verify, authenticate, and evaluate what companies say. Today, legions of skeptical analysts, the fuck out of here. Today, legions of skeptical analysts, bold regulators, empowered interest groups, doubting web surfers, and hardened journalists scrutinize any corporate statement or assertion. Want to know the compensation of a CEO? Check out the company's 10Q or 10K filings, or just type the CEO's name into Google. Want to know about the accuracy of an ad on eBay? Check the eBay feedback forum and see that 4,000 other people say about the seller. Looking for dirt on a company or want to receive regular rumor alerts about a competitor? Try fuckedcompany.com. Fuckedcompany.com. Shell can claim it's green till the cows come home, but if it isn't, those who care will find out. The next subheading here, accountability. To establish trust, firms must make clear commitments to distinct stakeholders and abide by them. Do what they say they will do. And they must demonstrate with clear communication, preferably with the verification stamp of the stakeholders themselves or independent outside experts, that they have met their commitments. In the past, accountability was often an undesirable state of affairs, invoking liabilities, testing, and scrutiny. Better to keep your head low, stay under the radar, and avoid making promises. In the transparent world, where every stakeholder has radar, accountability becomes a requirement for trust. In fact, for those who embrace it as a value, it is a powerful force for business success. People learn from history. Past experience establishes regularity and reliability. The networked economy has a new kind of memory. Network computing creates a global brain whose capacity to remember expands exponentially. As information, transactions, and communication turns into bits, firms and their stakeholders generate vast databases of business history. There is a searchable record of all kinds of information that was previously relegated. There is a searchable record of all kinds of information that was previously relegated to the ash can of history. Ash can? Really? Not the ashtray or the trash bin? Ash can? Gotcha. Detailed information who said what was detailed information about who said what was promised, what was done, and what was transacted is available at the speed of light. No more shoving things under the table. The table is glass. I like that. I like that analogy. I like that metaphor. Most large firms subscribe to Nexus. That means your potential partners can quickly pull up a complete clipping file of every article published about you. Former or disgruntled employees can start a website to collect grievances. Your internal memos may be published at internalmemos.com. Negative publicity might be gathered at corpwatch.com. Your record is inescapable. Yeah, folks are starting to redress their own grievances. They're recognizing that the government and corporate are in bed together, right? So they're taking the grievances, their complaints, and addressing them themselves, redressing them themselves. Abiding by commitments is clearly insufficient to establish trust. During the 1990s boom, many companies consistently produced quarterly results identical to analysts. Why do I keep messing that up? Identical to analyst expectations, but many used financial engineering, in quotes. Financial engineering. That's just doctoring reports and shit. Financial engineering and other fancy footwork to achieve such consistency. Revelations about this destroyed trust, and stock prices cratered when shareholders held companies accountable. This instance underscores the importance of honesty in maintaining trust and also points to the third element of trust. Ready? Ready? Here's a subheading here. Consideration of others' trusts. Sorry. I messed up that subheading. Consideration of others' interests, which I suppose is also others' trust. How much they value the relationship, right? I mean, they got a self-interest also, and so they'll trust the relationship. I wasn't that far off, but yeah, I completely misread that. From our experience, a critical pillar of trust is the belief that a company shows regard for the interests, desires, or feelings of others. One term to describe this is benevolence. Sometimes benevolence has a master-slave connotation, as we may think that only someone in a position of power or superiority can be benevolent. But any party can operate with benevolence or goodwill toward one another. Of course, when a company shows goodwill through philanthropic endeavors, it can enhance trusting relationships. Told ya. You see, told ya. But, it continues, goodwill is relevant to all stakeholders. Firms increase employee loyalty when employees believe that their company will be loyal to them, right? Trust is reciprocal. That's obvious enough. That they will not be discarded once the going gets a bit rough, or at least that the company will truly consider their interests and downsize only as a last resort, and then only with a fair and equitable severance. Despite the availability of price-cutting internet marketplaces, many firms choose to stick with existing suppliers to protect their suppliers' viability and the integrity of the supply chain. In doing so, they build trusting relationships and effective networked businesses. On the other side, in countless cases, companies do the right thing for customers, though it hurts short-term earnings. When extraction companies like Rio Tinto and Shell refuse to pay bribes in countries where bribery is the norm, they sometimes lose opportunities to less scrupulous competitors. However, they have determined that bribery is harmful to the societies in which it is practiced and decided that they have an obligation to behave with consideration for the long-term interests of citizens of these countries. This is sometimes a difficult decision, but one that can pay off over the long run. I mean, that's just a claim that they're not bribing anybody, right? We don't actually know that. Baxter, continuing, Baxter advised customers to discontinue use of his dialysis machines and stopped sales of them when it learned that they might be linked to patient deaths. It did not wait for further investigation. That, go Baxter, W. Baxter, right? Of course, avoiding litigation was part of its motivation, but the speed and completeness of the decision, causing it a significant loss in revenue, suggests a deeper business integrity was in operation. It suggested, right? It suggested. But of course, you don't want to get sued for your machines killing people. I get it. I understand. The next subheading, transparency. Clearly, trust depends on transparency. I like that play on words. Sometimes trust is given implicitly. A baby trusts her mother, but even a baby's genes guide her to seek evidence of maternal behavior. Trust depends on transparency, and transparency depends on trust. Indeed, as people learn to collaborate well over time, transparency and trust reinforce each other, generating a virtuous cycle. We began this book with the question, what is fidelity hiding? Yeah, go listen to chapter 1. Chapter 1 about fidelity and like the recession, the crash, and just the general distrust that was created in the early 2000s. The question, what are they hiding, encapsulates the relationship between transparency and trust. It implies that if company executives hold secrets, they do so for a nefarious reason, and therefore they are undeserving of trust. Stakeholders know that the fewer secrets companies keep, the more likely they will be trusted. You are less likely to trust a firm that withholds information pertinent to your interests. Firms cannot be transparent unless they are trustworthy, as openness will harm them. Firms that are trustworthy should be transparent because openness helps stakeholders validate their integrity. In an increasingly transparent world, active openness is becoming central to building trust between stakeholders and the firm. To coin a phrase, corporations should undress for success. Corporations should get naked. That was me just commentating. Corporations should undress for success. I kind of like that phrase. It's a good phrase. I think it has many different meanings. Undress for success. Corporations should undress for success. Step 2, the second subtitle here, the next subtitle, Step 2, trust. How do open enterprises create trust, and what role do values play? Trust is hard to define because it is so fundamental, but you can usually tell when it's warranted. We seek it for robust workplaces and regret its frailty in our community, local and global. In our increasingly transparent, networked business world, companies need it like never before just to stay alive. When trust falls, firms fail. 3 centuries before Christ, Aristotle's Rhetoric argued that ethos, the trust in a speaker by a listener, depended on the perception of 3 characteristics: correctness of opinions, character, that's the reliability, the competence, and honesty, and goodwill, that's benevolent intentions toward the listener. Over 2 millennia later, the great philosopher's words provide a sound basis for our thinking. Trust is the expectation that others will be honest, accountable, considerate, and open. Historically, when people or organizations have trusted a corporation, they have expected it will tell them the truth, abide by its commitments, and do the right thing, behave fairly with goodwill, and take their interests into account. Today, transparency profoundly affects these 3 values. It is also a value itself. In the new business environment, transparency is critical to building trust. In many ways, transparency is the most important corporate value because it forces firms to embrace the other values required by various stakeholder markets. Indeed, as the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant. I would agree. I agree to a degree. Transparency forces trustworthy behavior. If you're open, you are less likely to have something to hide. We are already, we have already discussed how transparency is an important new value that creates trust. Transparency also affects the process whereby trust is generated. Trust is established through four practices: presence of shared norms and values, reciprocity, validation, and transference. The transparent environment changes each of these, accelerating the speed at which trust can be strengthened or weakened, consolidated or destroyed. Here's the first one. A, right? A, shared norms and values. Shared norms among parties supports trust. Norms can range from interpersonal practices to formal law sets out by authorities. To formal laws set out by authorities. As in the case of rules governing expense accounts or regulations regarding the reporting of financial results, norms often reflect deeply held values, as in the essential Western belief that people should be left alone if they aren't hurting anyone. In a transparent world, the values that underpin norms become ever more important. The business world is much more complex than even a generation ago. Transactions have grown exponentially. Communication has exploded and fragmented as dozens of emails replace a meeting or enable previously impossible collaboration on a global basis. We communicate with a broader range of individuals. Markets are global, bringing a clash of local cultures to the table. Firms assemble and disassemble ad hoc partnerships overnight. Firms assemble and disassemble ad hoc partnerships overnight. I like that. Where elaborate contracts are unfeasible. In this environment, it is not possible to anticipate the permutations and combinations of choices people need to make through formal rules alone. Rather, the most effective organizations and partnerships are those based on commonly shared values. Trust drops transaction, interaction, and partnering costs. Autonomous individuals and groups are able to conduct business on a platform of shared values. In the transparent world, values are also evidenced more easily. Consider the tale of coltan, a specialized mineral used in electronics equipment. Proceeds from coltan mining are alleged to finance civil wars and brutal regimes in Rwanda and Uganda. To mine coltan, rebels have overrun the Congo's national parks, clearing out large chunks of the area's lush forests and killing endangered elephants and gorillas for food. Yesterday, no mobile phone manufacturer would dream of trumpeting its coltan policy or the values that underpin it in its sales literature. A recent dialogue on a consumer action website went as follows, quote, my wife and I have two kids in school and daycare. We regularly waste time and money and gasoline that could have been saved if we owned cell phones, and we want to buy cell phones. We know we should be boycotting companies that use Congolese coltan, but which brands are they? Are there companies which have renounced using Congolese coltan? A reader quickly responded by citing a story on the U.S. National Public Radio website. He explained that every telephone uses coltan, so the trick is finding one that doesn't use African coltan. I think your best bet would be Motorola. That's the answer, right? Most brochures tout battery life, the pricing, instant messaging. internet access, or MP3 capabilities. But this consumer doesn't care about all that. He wants to know if his purchase is fueling a civil war. And he can find out. The next subheading, B, reciprocity. Trusting relationships engender reciprocal obligations. This can occur in a specific situation, say the sale of an item on eBay. The trust each party has for the other is enhanced through the transaction. Or every positive performance review an employee receives contributes to the sense of reciprocal obligation to perform a job well for the company. Reciprocity can take time to develop, where there may be a relationship that at any given time may be unrequited, but over time is repaid and balanced. Again, this contributes to the development of long-term obligations between people. Transparency is requiring firms to behave in a reciprocal rather than an authoritarian manner. Procter & Gamble senior management may have hand down a game plan to its employees. Alternatively, it may engage employees in a collaborative process to determine work plans and commitments. In doing so, it creates reciprocal obligations. Modern management theory is rich with evidence that the latter approach works best in terms of employee motivation, comprehension of work plans, development, and the quality of work products. Shell could have sought to impose its decision to build a plant in Angola on the population. It decided to adopt a different approach where it engaged the local government and communities, generating more confidence that they would benefit from the project. Yeah, that's true. If your employee has some say in work plans, in the direction a company, not the ultimate direction, but in methods, I guess, methodologies for completing, for achieving objectives of a company. If employees have some say in it, you can rest assured that you might come upon innovation, efficiency, but that takes time. It takes time and it takes dedication. It takes somebody caring and giving a fuck to interview the lower rungs in an organization, to interview those that are entry level, at least those that are beneath you, because everybody's entry level forever. And that's the basis of this podcast. Everyone is entry level forever. Anyone can be quote unquote let go tomorrow. C, that's the next subheading. C, validation. Visibility into the operations and behavior of firms enables individuals to authenticate and validate corporate statements and claims, and even to evaluate the values of products and services. Honesty, reliability, and consideration must be verifiable and increasingly verified. That's why auditors exist and why their integrity is so important. Validation can be provided by an independent authority for a specific topic. You may trust the American Medical Association to certify doctors, to practice medicine. Should you trust the safety claims of automaker Kia? Check out www.crashtest.com or a dozen other independent evaluators on the net. Validation can also be achieved through investigation. Patients having laser eye surgery are vulnerable. Today, they can choose whom to trust and reduce their vulnerability by doing an online investigation of suppliers in the area, checking for failure rates and patient satisfaction. Many local magazines publish annual, quote, Best Doctors in Town articles, or you can try bestdoctors.com to see if your doctor has any state medical board disciplinary actions in their record, or to find a physician whose patients recommend them. You're considering moving to a new neighborhood and you want to know if the local school is a good one. Check out the massive online database of all U.S. schools provided by Standard & Poor's performance evaluation services. Slice and dice the data, asking for all the schools in the geographical area that have certain characteristics. Quote, "We are in the transparency business," says Performance Evaluation Services President Bill Cox. That's good. That's good. I like that. I like data. D, the next subheading, D, transference. The networked economy accelerates the process whereby trust or mistrust transfers from one party to another. If you trust a doctor and your friend trusts you, your friend may place her medical care in the hands of your doctor, right? Because trust transfers. Trust can also be transferred indirectly into a diffuse population. Relatively large networks like eBay, a religious group or a political party, Greenpeace, or the National Rifle Association may contain generalized trust or social capital without close personal contact among all members. Mistrust can spread through a stakeholder group like a prairie fire, however. For some inexplicable reason, bad news seems to travel faster and generalize further than good news. The evidence to support this observation is growing. Intel learned how mistrust can be transferred in a transparent business environment back in 1994. A rumor spread on the net, like a form of reverse viral marketing, alleging that the Pentium chip was having trouble doing floating point calculations. Trust in the Pentium brand evaporated, and Pentium joke databases began to proliferate. Here's one. What's the difference between a 9-year-old and a Pentium chip? A 9-year-old can do long division. Intel, I'm a fucking retarded nerd, yo. What can I say? Intel, which had not yet figured out the rules of a transparent world, responded with advertising and press releases. This merely inflamed and accelerated the transference of mistrust already underway. Intel didn't know at the time that maintaining customer trust is very different when knowledgeable stakeholders can sift through information and perform their own validation. Facts are quickly checked. Loss of credibility can be instantaneous. Second chances are rare and hard to effect. Grandstand plays had better be perfect. Playing one audience against another is easy to detect. Not so much. That one there. Playing one audience against another is easy to detect. It's not that easy to detect. I mean, look at the fucking jab, right? Look at the guidelines and mandates that got dropped on us in the early 2020s. Motherfuckers were not detecting shit, not reading any of the graphs or any of the charts, finding what buckets, quote unquote, like, well, in parentheses, like the flu, what buckets disappeared and what buckets just suddenly appeared, like the one that's been tracked this whole fucking time, and how many deaths were supposedly tabulated at the very beginning, but now that everybody's got the fucking therapy, right? They ain't tracking deaths anymore. That's weird. Playing one audience against another is easy to detect, and misinformation or rumors need to be tackled head on. Yeah, I agree with that last piece. It needs to be tackled head on. But, we're talking about the government. And if not the government, we're talking about corporates with corporate interests. They're not even personal. They're not even human interests anymore. They're corporate interests. Ultimately, Intel had to stop production of the chip and write down $470 million. Damn, they just wrote that off, huh? Yet, with attentive relationship building, the Pentium brand stormed back and most people forgot the incident. Trust, as expressed in the Pentium brand image, was here today, gone tomorrow, and back again. Not the next day, but after months of painstaking work. Nike is another example. After suffering considerably for its labor standards in the 1980s and early 1990s, Nike has become a leader in advancing the interests of workers in poor countries. This includes policies that require their contractors to prohibit child labor and pay employees at least the minimum wage or the prevailing industry wage, whichever is higher. But old mistrusts die hard, and Nike has had a terrible time shaking the image. That's weird. A terrible time. Has had since 2002? Really? Because in 2023, there's memes. There's memes still floating around of, of Nike of Nike firing child labor, of Nike firing child workers because they're not vaxxed. Yo, oh, the irony. Blind trust, it continues. Blind trust is disappearing. Visibility means that validation of trust is a click away, as is the power to transfer or destroy trust. To establish and maintain trust, businesses today need to engage with various classes of stakeholders to find commonly held norms, generate reciprocal obligations, provide good value, and behave appropriately. Step 3. Here's the next subheading. Step 3. Relationships. The next step up the values value ladder is business relationships. As individuals and organizations gain increased access to information and visibility into the operations of firms, new kinds of relationships become possible and even necessary. Within the corporation, new kinds of relationships are possible among employees and between employees and the firm. Knowledge work demands unstructured collaboration. In the past, all important relationships were internal to the organization. Companies talked about, quote, relationships or, quote, partnerships with customers and suppliers. But these terms were typically euphemisms for a game of winner-take-all poker. Yeah. Hey, technically, that's a relationship, right? Even conflict is technically a relationship. It's a sour, it's a harsh, it's a negative relationship, right? But business is war and business is personal. It's a personal relationship. Supply chains, more often than not, were adversarial. Similarly, companies sold products and services to customers, described as creating customer relationships. But car companies, for example, didn't have a relationship with their customers in any significant sense of the term. Automakers did market research to understand customers. They did mass advertising to establish brands. They sold and serviced vehicles, but few customers would describe this as a relationship. The only important relationships existed inside of the firm. There were reporting relationships, dotted line relationships, the project teams whose members collaborated with one another. Such relationships were often carefully defined. You were part of the human resource with roles, responsibilities, reward systems, and the like. Great practitioners, such as Alfred Sloan, who took GM to prominence, developed entire theories of management based on this paradigm. But now, the transparent business environment renders the vertically integrated corporation obsolete. A superior form of wealth creation has arisen, the business web. Because the internet slashes the cost of sharing knowledge, collaborating, and meshing business processes among corporations, companies can now focus on their core competencies and partner or outsource to do the rest. In industry after industry, B-webs are proving more supple, innovative, cost-efficient, and profitable rather than their traditional vertically integrated competitors. Yo, that last sentence sounded like low-key sexually innuenduous. Innuenduous. B-webs are proving more supple, really? And then it says they're proving more supple than their traditionally vertically integrated competitors. So, like, I don't know, they're making B-webs out to be like supple and voluptuous, right? They're making naked corporations to be supple and voluptuous and not dicks. You feel me? Not vertically integrated. That's funny. What can I say? I'm a retarded nerd. During the early enthusiasm of B2B software companies, Many pundits assumed that partner promiscuity based on lowest price was the new model, that all business flows to the lowest bidder. Cheaper widgets a mouse click away would win the day, but price isn't everything. It often makes more sense to work closely with selected suppliers. Dell Computer, for example, could split its business for components among many suppliers in order to keep them all on their toes. Instead, it gives its business to a small group of suppliers in which it has the most confidence. They work closely to produce the best components and the best computers. Through the net, Dell gives real-time scorecards to all its suppliers that provide both feedback on their performance and customer data. For a components manufacturer, this relationship is extremely valuable. Even if the sales to Dell earn low margins, the information allows the manufacturer to alter its product mix and manage inventories strategically. Moreover, customers become part of the business web as they interact with services and even co-create value with companies. For the first time, companies can forge two-way, interactive, personalized relationships with all customers on a mass scale. While the virtue of deep relationships was always self-evident in theory, in reality it wasn't practical. But now, the ubiquitous, cheap, and interactive net, coupled with enormous low-cost databases, enables producers to develop a meaningful direct relationship with each customer. Sellers and buyers have ongoing dialogue, establishing trust through reciprocity. Doug, just real quick, that paragraph right there tells me that the government could work through an app, right? I mean, maybe we need blockchain for this or something that cements trust. But the fact that the government is not utilizing this type of information for its citizens to the benefit, to promote, to develop, to empower its citizens tells me all I need to know, right? Tells me everything I need to know about the government and corporate, which is why I know the government is a shittily run corporation. That's all. It's like a nonprofit almost. It's not even a nonprofit. It's just a shittily run corporation that taxes people. Yeah, it's just a tax. They don't even sell anything. They provide minimal value and they charge exorbitant. And you don't even feel it because it's just going towards the national debt. You don't even feel it. Folks don't even feel it. Folks don't recognize it. But the government is a corporation. This is corporate war, I'm telling you. This concept seems to have been lost to the music industry, okay, so we're just going with the superficial shit, huh? The music industry. This concept seems to have been lost to the music industry, which has embraced the pick a fight style of customer relations. The industry has fought many of the major technological innovations that made music more accessible and engaged customers in the distribution of music, from cassette tape machines to MP3. Companies that earned consumers' gratitude for bringing them the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel are now widely loathed as the enemy. Transparency is enabling new kinds of relationships with shareholders as well. The days when the Industrial Relations Department simply issued press releases, answered the phone, and mastered the spin in annual reports are disappearing. Nah, dog. Spin is still there. Spin is still in. Partnerships and other relationships become the foundation of wealth creation. The stronger they are, the more likely firms can create value and succeed. The next subheading here is step 4, value. The final step in the ladder is value. The integrity The new integrity, as we define it, honesty, accountability, consideration of stakeholders' interest, and transparency, is more than just a matter of values. Increasingly, the new integrity is becoming a foundation of value creation, competitive strategy, indeed, of competitive advantage. A term commonly used to sum up what it means for a business to be, quote, good, to show genuine long-term consideration for all its stakeholders is sustainability. Yeah, hell yeah. I agree with that. Sustainability. I mean, why not reinvest, right? I've been harping on it this chapter and the previous episodes, the previous chapters, that reinvesting your profits and creating sustainability instead of soaking and sucking up resources and then bouncing out to the next area and soaking up and sucking up their resources next, right? It appears less parasitic. Let's just put it that way. Continuing, a widely accepted definition of sustainability is, quote, meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That's pretty concise. Yeah. This is not just about healthy ecosystems or contented communities. Sustainability is also about engineering great businesses that will be there for the long haul, to the benefit of their customers, employees, business partners, and shareholders. Here's a quick overview. A successful strategy has three basic parts, two of which are familiar. To consistently outperform its competition, a company can either grow faster, what we call sustainable growth, or manage costs better, sustainable efficiency. The third part has to do with the company's very ability to exist. We call it sustainable foundations. And then in parentheses, it has here figure 3.2, which I'll describe to you here in a little bit. We put the word sustainable at the front of these three terms not merely to make a rhetorical point, it says. Sustainable firm economics are very much in demand as company directors, officers, and institutional shareholders increasingly focus on long-term performance rather than quick hit, often misleading quarterly results. A parenthetical note. As with any general approach to building a business strategy, not all competitive drivers apply equally to all companies or to all situations. Sometimes only one or two drivers will apply, sometimes all. Every good strategy is unique and specific. So here's figure 3.2. I'll describe it for you briefly. It's a large, I guess it's a chart. It's a large box. It's like a scale, right? And it has boxes going across. Now, these boxes have a gradient to them because the book isn't black and white. It has a shading gradient to them. There's the lighter, it says here, sustainable foundations, right? The sustainable foundations are at the top. And at the bottom, it's a darker color for some reason. It's sustainable efficiency. Now, I haven't read through this, so I don't know what the correlation between the color and the position of these labels are, right? So you got sustainable foundations, the lightest color at the top, sustainable growth in the middle, it's a gray color, and then sustainable efficiency, which is a darker color at the bottom. The sustainable foundations include peace, order, and good governance, the license to operate, and access to capital. Sustainable growth in the middle contains best-in-class capabilities, employees, partners, value, innovation, and brand reputation and customer loyalty. Sustainable efficiency at the bottom contains risk reduction, process improvements, lower transaction costs, process efficiencies, quality management, that's eco-efficiency, codes and standards, and minimizing regulation and litigation. Just right off the top of my head, I don't see a relationship between the position of these three and their color. So if you can make that out, kudos to you. The next subheading, I'm just continuing. The next subheading is foundational
sustainable foundations. I was about to say foundational substations. Sustainable foundations. Any company's existence depends on three foundation stones. Companies may take these for granted when doing everyday planning. Many even ignore these issues when strategizing for the long term. They do so at their peril. 1. Peace, order, and good governance. Oh, it's going to go through them. Through sustainable foundations, yeah, it's going to go through those that we listed. Maybe there is an order to them. Number 1, peace, order, and good governance. The first driver is the overall social, political, and legal environment, including peace, political stability, free markets, property rights, rule of law, absence of bribery, and so on. Clearly, we are in a period when peace, order, and good governance are at great risk. Really? 2002? You don't say, because 2023, this shit looks wild. The Wild West never fucking left. That's why the podcast is called Corporate Cowboys. And it says, continuing, and few companies perform sustainably well in the midst of war, terrorism, corruption, and political chaos. Many of these problems are exacerbated by the great inequalities, hardships, and grievances, real or perceived, perceived like victimization, that separate richer and poorer countries. When the actions of dominant governments like the United States, it lists it as an example. When the actions of dominant governments, I'm fucking this one up. When the actions of dominant governments like the United States and global agencies like the IMF are blamed for local economic downturns, e.g., Argentina, or worse, e.g., war, Western corporations take a hit. Corporations face the reality that corporations face the reality that the very agencies that have represented their interests and promoted their worldview may indirectly spark boycotts or economic implosions. Competitive advantage comes from knowing when and how the winds of peace, order, and good governance are changing, and acting accordingly. Being first out of a country when it's risky, and first in when it's safe. It also comes from being there to enhance good governance so that when the opportunities arise, knowledge and relationships already exist. In such a manner, BP entered the Russian oil industry on a large scale in February 2003. BP, British Petroleum? Really? No way, because in 2023, Russia's like no-go right now. All right, continuing. Subheading number 2, license to operate. Companies now face forces that, for all practical purposes, challenge their very right to exist, or at least the right to do business in a particular market. This is a trust factor that affects both individual businesses and groups of businesses. For example, several companies from a specific country or in a particular industry. McDonald's has faced this in both the United States and Europe for many years. And by early 2003, such challenges became a competitive disadvantage. In 2003, the company reported its first ever quarterly loss. McDonald's is a consummate marketing company. It has excelled in linking philanthropy and community involvement to its brand, but this challenge cannot be turned around by marketing and good deeds alone. Critics question the company's core product, fatty food from allegedly mistreated cows, and challenge its existence as an embodiment of the homogenizing forces of globalization. More broadly, globalization faces a crisis of legitimacy. Engagement with local stakeholders, genuine localization, is one way to address this problem. Global corporations that lay down deep local roots by hiring locally from the executive level on and embrace local partnerships with suppliers and communities of stakeholders are in the best position to gain a sustainable license to operate. Subheading number 3, access to capital. In 2002, irresponsible behavior by executives and corporate boards devastated the capital markets and destroyed shareholder confidence. Regaining trust will require sustained improvements in corporate governance, behavior, transparency, and accountability. Healthy investor relationships are a two-way street where firms engage directly with shareholders, especially large institutions like mutual and pension funds that tend to invest for the long term. Open enterprises avoid spin in shareholder briefings, press releases, and annual reports, and increasingly deliver easy-to-follow factual information. Instead of the often misleading and one-dimensional quarterly financial guidance, open enterprises provide a more meaningful sort of guidance, clear explanations of past performance, current challenges, strategies, and plans. One result of the 2002 governance crisis was that institutional investors, particularly pension, labor, and social funds, gained leverage. As we describe in Chapter 8, we haven't read that yet, so stay tuned, folks. We haven't read Chapter 8 yet. That'll, I'm assuming, be Season 7, Episode 8. But, we're at Episode 3 right now, so relax, take it easy, enjoy the ride. As we describe in Chapter 8, they will also increasingly place broader social and environmental issues on the shareholder agenda. Companies that address such issues will be advantaged in gaining and maintaining access to shareholder capital. Next subheading, sustainable growth. So I'm assuming that this is like the next subheading, and then whatever numbers continue after that will be little subcategories of this subheading. So sustainable growth. The three top-line competitive drivers stand out. Or three top-line competitive drivers stand out. First, best-in-class capabilities, including leadership, employees, and business partners. 2, strategic innovation. And 3, brand reputation and customer loyalty. For any veteran business planner, these concepts are old hat. Yet, all three are changing thanks to the new integrity and focus on sustainability. Honesty, consideration of stakeholders' interests, accountability, and transparency. These are vital to attracting, retaining, and ensuring consistent performance from the key resources that firms require in an increasingly interdependent world. As companies focus ever more narrowly on what they do best, they need suppliers, distributors, and employees who take shared responsibility for delivering value to the end customer, for taking initiative in maximizing efficiencies, and for being flexible when market conditions change for better or for worse. Such best-in-class capabilities are hard to find, but when found, they become critical to a company's success. Among firms, trust drops transaction costs and enables the free flow of information required for business web performance. Where transactions provide opportunities for misrepresentation, non-compliance, or fraud, mutual trust reduces the contracting costs associated with formal agreements. This social capital provides an effective enforcement mechanism that is far cheaper than elaborate contracts, extensive tracking systems, and litigation. Free flow of information in a trusting atmosphere also dramatically improves the productivity and performance of inter-enterprise, like inside the enterprise, inter-enterprise collaborative business processes. That means intercommunication inside of organizations. That means cross-communication inside of organizations, being able to communicate across departments, across divisions, to seamlessly create innovative new innovative processes, new and innovative processes. Continuing. As we describe in chapter 4, that's the next chapter, employees are easier to recruit, more productive, and more likely to stick around in companies that are actively transparent and accountable to their staff. The investment bank UBS Warburg describes how its support of the regeneration of London's East End tangibly enhances its recruitment, retention, and development of top employees. On the flip side, a veteran Nike employee had this to say about the impact of the sweatshop charges that this company has faced. Quote, "It comes up at every dinner party, and when it doesn't, it's like the elephant in the corner of the room. It goes from you have the coolest job to, I'm not so sure." Within firms, end quote. Within firms, trust strengthens capability. Employees have unprecedented access to information about their company because new models of work demand it. Work systems in traditional firms were hierarchical, and relationships were based on control and authority. Today's smart companies design collaborative systems where teamwork harnesses the power of human capital more effectively. Companies replace the bonds of traditional hierarchy with bonds of trust, embodied in shared values, clear rules of engagement, and quality business processes. Trust builds motivation, security, and loyalty. It reduces inhibitions and defenses, essential for creative thinking and collaboration. So it reduces inhibitions and defenses, essential for creative thinking and collaboration. I'm gonna comment on that and say yes, that's true. I think it doesn't immediately charge people and put them on the defensive. If you trust somebody, you're more open. You're more open to good ideas. Where if you are not trusting or trustworthy, you're more closed off to even good ideas. Continuing, without trusting relationships, no company can ever hope to achieve high performance. Capability is of little value, however, if a firm and its partners are pointed in the wrong direction. This is where strategic innovation comes in. In their 2002 book, Walking the Talk, the chairman of Anova Holding, that's Stephen Schmidheiny, DuPont, that's Charles Halliday Jr., and Shell, that's Philip Watts, describe how strategic innovation arises from the new integrity. It's a block quote, so here goes. The relatively straightforward concept of eco-efficiency has already encouraged some companies to make radical shifts from maximizing sales to selling no thing at all, and being cleaner and more profitable in the process. Instead of selling things, they sell services, or they lease things, or both. Companies that once sold auto paint to car companies now sell the service of painting cars. So where once they improved the bottom line by maximizing cans of paint sold, they now improve the bottom line by minimizing the use of paint per car. As a brand reputation, that's the end of the quote there. As for brand reputation and customer loyalty, British Telecom, that's BT, asked a good question. Does a shopper really stop and think about corporate responsibility before making any one of thousands of buying decisions per year? Its market research indicates that a large and growing number of consumers claim they consider corporate social responsibility, CSR, in their buying decisions. Yet, BT notes, quote, it's only in a relatively small number of these cases, e.g. buying organic produce, that the consumer actually makes a conscious consideration of the supplier's environmental, social, and ethical performance. But our model shows that a company's reputation has a significant influence over customer satisfaction ratings. And given that CSR is a component of reputation, this would suggest that there could be an important subconscious CSR element to purchasing decisions. If BT were to cease all its CSR activities, i.e., cease treating employees with respect, ignore environmental issues, no longer emphasize the need to act with integrity, ceasing non profitable services, and canceling all community activities, then our customer satisfaction rating would drop by 10%. That's the end quote. A difference of this magnitude is often the difference between market leadership and also ran status. No single initiative will necessarily change customer perceptions of a company, yet the aggregate matters enormously. Companies can be liked, they can be perceived neutrally, or they can be actively disliked. A company may not realize it is sliding from one category to another until it is too late for a quick fix. The next subheading here, sustainable cost control. The typical management decision about competitive cost control is about cycle times, business processes, supply chains, and so on. As we shall discuss momentarily, sustainability strategies related to eco-efficiency and other dimensions can make a big contribution to such traditional areas of performance. But we begin with a more stirring cost driver, risk. Increasingly, corporate officers and directors, sometimes with the encouragement of institutional investors, recognize that they must pay more attention to risk. They must identify and control a broad portfolio of risks. How? They try to reduce or eliminate risks, or they can set aside contingency funds or buy insurance policies to offset them. Some risks, once identified, can be eliminated in cost-neutral or profitable ways. Others impose costs, sometimes big costs. Corporations face a wide and growing variety of potential threats, from new integrity issues such as customer abandonment, legal fees, and scandal costs, or even executive crime or civil unrest in some countries. Hill and Knowlton CEO Paul Taff argues that the risk of a trust crisis entails far greater costs than firms recognize. Quote, the cost is not just limited to share price hits. There's often a deep emotional cost. For example, after the Brent Spar, that's the North Sea oil rig fiasco, Shell had trouble recruiting on campus. It previously was one of the top employers by choice. It was previously one of the top employers of choice by graduates. Brent Spar was an environmental issue, but it played out as a risk to Shell's reputation. True environmental risks may not be stakeholder driven, and therefore risk may be overlooked. Managers who treat environmental damage as only a reputation issue or an externality to be dumped on society ignore at their peril how Mother Nature bites back. Such self-delusion is a dangerous form of opacity. Concerns about the real costs of global warming and climate, for example, are moving from the NGO barricades to corporate boardrooms. One statement of the issues is sponsored by two of the world's largest reinsurance companies, that's Swiss Reinsurance and Munich Reinsurance, and companies such as Abbey National, Allianz Insurance, Credit Suisse Group, that's CFFB, ING, Merrill Lynch, Rabobank, and UBS. I laughed at Rabobank. Their report argues that evidence of change is all around us. In 2003, hurricanes and tropical storms were projected to increase by about 25% over 2002. The warmest years on record were 2002 and 1998. If trends persist, weather-related natural disasters will soon create $150 billion in annual losses versus $10 billion during 1990s. 2/3 will not be insured. Sample impacts by industry are, and there's a list here, so I'll number them off. The first, drought-induced crop damage is raising food costs. In 2003, bakeries in the United States faced the highest flour prices in over 70 years. Australian farm output fell by 12.5% during the 3 months to September 2002, and prices rose 1.4%. Number two, weather-dependent tourist destinations like ski resorts, beach resorts, and the Great Barrier Reef face the risk of declining popularity. Number three, in late 2002, electricity prices increased in parts of the U.S. West as water shortages cut hydropower generation. Number four, fires threatened the forestry sector. In 2002, over 70,000 fires burned down 7.1 million acres in North America, nearly double the 10-year average. In 2002, hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico caused $700 million in damages and curtailed oil and gas production. One 3-day shutdown alone led to industrial losses of some $2 billion. The report argues, and that's the end of the list, the report argues that in addition to the damage that climate change can do to their companies, directors and officers in carbon-intensive industries face the risk of negligence lawsuits from shareholders, employees, or communities. Mitigating environmental risks can add another dimension to sustainable cost control. And they list a couple of points here. Point one, BP claims net present value savings higher than $650 million over 3 years from reducing fuel and gas venting and flaring. Number two, European semiconductor manufacturer ST Microelectronics reports a 2-year payback on its energy conservation programs with energy cost savings of over $1 billion between 1994 and 2010. And then third, IBM conservatively estimates a 2-to-1 return on its environmental investments in the 5 years since it began tracking its program. In 2001, the net benefit was $140 million. That's the end of the list. Several components of the business case for sustainable cost control relate to 3 kinds of process improvements. Transparency and accountability enhance trust and therefore reduce transaction costs. Also, extensive information sharing both within and among companies in a business web leads to dramatic process efficiencies. That's quicker response times and lower inventories. Procter & Gamble and Gillette predict that the next technological revolution in information sharing based on the radio frequency ID tag, that's RFID, a wireless communicating electronic version of a barcode, could lead to inventory reductions of 10% or more, which would result in massive cost savings. A third process factor has to do with quality management, which is essentially about reducing costs by minimizing defects and wastes. Toyota, the world leader in quality management, has applied its quality protocols to energy and resource conservation, simultaneously improving its environmental conservation processes and reducing the consumption of materials, energy, and effort. Result: Toyota is one of the most efficient and profitable companies in the car business. Another part of quality management is the use of codes and standards to prescribe how work should be done, to measure and report on outcomes, and to set targets on improvement. Historically, such codes like ISO 9000 focused narrowly on product and service quality. Codes of practice are now a big part of the new integrity. They include corporate values statements, codes of social and environmental conduct, and increasingly sophisticated accountability toolkits for tracking and reporting on environmental and social performance. Typically introduced initially to drive, quote, good behavior, such codes and standards quickly take on double duty as new dimensions of a company's overall quality management arsenal. A last dimension to cost control, the icing on the cake, is minimizing regulation and litigation. When companies voluntarily take on the new integrity and a sustainability agenda and prove it through engagement, accountability, and transparency, their governments are less likely to impose onerous and bureaucratic rules, policing, auditing, and penalties. In the United Kingdom, for example, a high percentage of firms voluntarily produce corporate responsibility reports, so perhaps the government will not impose them through legislation, as the French and Japanese governments have done. And as we have already suggested, fiduciaries will be less exposed to stakeholder lawsuits if they address the risks imposed by climate change. Chances are that you are some combination of shareholder, customer, partner, employee, and citizen. In the following 5 chapters, we look deep into how transparency changes the ways corporations behave toward you in each of the hats you wear. Just a final commentary. I think that's a good way to minimize regulation and litigation. You want to mitigate any risk of scrutiny, and of lawsuits, right? So if you don't want to litigate a lawsuit, you want to mitigate any risk of that happening, and you could do that through transparency. Obviously, you live well by doing good, and you live long by doing right. That's the end of chapter 3. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll catch you next time on the Corporate Cowboys Podcast as we read The Naked Corporation: How the Age of Transparency Will Revolutionize Business. Thank you.